Dear ladies and gentlemen, we are running a couple of minutes late. I apologize for that, but let's start and welcome to the panel with a very long title. But to make it short, we will talk about for next hour or so about Russia, mainly about the dynamics within Russia. As we see, and as distinguished panelists can see, it's a lot of interest for Russia because of our audience. But with interest come also expectations. And of course, since we are here for the audience, we believe that there are high expectations in the audience, and I believe we will cope with it and we will deliver. I don't want to spend too much of precious time for a long intro, but for beginning, allow me a couple of words about the context of this panel. As we enter the third year of war in Ukraine, it becomes evident that Putin is gearing for a long war. Notably, shift towards a war economy is happening with nearly 10% of gross domestic product, GDP, and 25 to 30% of federal budget is going for a military defense complex in the current year. Until now, the Russian economy has managed to withstand the unprecedented sanctions imposed by the West. Despite the embargo and price cap restrictions, all revenues continue to boost public accounts. But this is one part of the parallel reality we will talk about. The other side of the coin says that there are many indicators that there are significant challenges not only within the economy, but also within the political system of Kremlin and the power structure within Russia. Here, we may remember the Wagner case happened only last year, but somehow it managed to fade from the public memory. And the question, of course, remains, when or might we expect something similar developments in the future? When I'm coming to Bled Strategic Forum for a couple of years now, and since February 2022, it's all about Russia. Even today, I was at the panel in Pax Americana, and one-fourth of the time, panelists were discussing Russia. And that was the main idea for today's panels, to talk about Russia not only from the outside, but also to talk about Russia from the inside, to better understand the dynamics in Russia, in Russian society, in Russian political system, because I believe that only understanding better those internal dynamics, it will enable us to go for strategy, how to deal with Russia today and how to deal with Russia tomorrow. If you were at the Bled Strategic Forum yesterday, you might remember words of Ms. Navalnaya referring exactly to this strategy, or some might say that she missed the strategy. My name is Denis Mancevič, and I will be the moderator of today's discussion. Today with us are distinguished panelists. First of all, let's welcome Tatiana Grinkevich, human rights activists and young Bled Strategic Forum participants coming from Russia. Please. Today is also with us Ambassador Terhi Hakala, EU Special Representative for Central Asia, originally coming from Finland. Welcome. Today with us is also Ambassador Volk, State Secretary for International Affairs and National and International Security from Office of the Prime Minister of Slovenia. And Mr. Leonid Volkov, Political Director, Anti-Corruption Foundation, and very important person from the Navalny team. Welcome. Let's move to the first round of questions. And let's stop at this point at the borders of Russia. And here I would like to ask Ambassador Hakala, since you have extensive diplomatic experience dealing with Russia, but also the Caucasus and Central Asia countries, I would like to ask you how you see the current state of play in the region, because one of the paradoxes of the outcome or current state of play of the war is that we have these parallel realities. On the one hand, Russia would like us to perceive that Russia is gaining influence even in this situation in Central Asia and at the borders, while there are also other views that Russia is losing. How you see the situation?
Thank you for having me here. I would say that Central Asia, as we speak, they have experienced several challenges during the past years, and it started with the regime change in Afghanistan. Summer 21, events in Kazakhstan, January 22, and then the Russian invasion, full-fledged invasion of Ukraine a month later. I think it was really a wake-up call. Of course, Central Asians, South Caucasus countries, they know their neighbor. I mean, we have witnessed the war in Georgia 2008. We've seen the occupation of Crimea and eastern Ukraine. But this was a real war. This was a full-fledged invasion which nobody believed in those regions. I think they were still hoping until the last moment that this is not happening. I was in the region when it started, and it was clearly a shock. And in these 3 years, I have seen a big change, to be honest. Of course, Russia has a big role in Central Asia historically, culturally, linguistically. There are Russian people living in Central Asia, also in South Caucasus. But I would say that the Russian role is changing. All countries are trying to find new opportunities, to diversify their options, to strengthen their sovereignty and territorial integrity, because it's about building a nation which is resilient against a big nation which is attacking and invading a neighboring country. And this has been a big lesson learned for all, I would say, countries in Central Asia, but also in South Caucasus and further on.
Will China play this role of the big brother in the region?
Well, China has been there also for the past 30 years as the European Union, ever since the collapse of the Soviet Union and when the countries gained independence. So it's clear that China has a big role, but also China is using this opportunity. China is becoming more also a security provider, so the roles are changing a bit. Russia was traditionally the security provider, self-evident one, also against the situation in Afghanistan and the threats emanating from Afghanistan. But the roles are changing because Russia is stuck now in this long war in Ukraine. So obviously other interlocutors, other strong players like China are using the opportunity and coming in different sectors.
Thank you. Moving a little bit closer to our region, Ambassador Volk, you were ambassador of Slovenia to Italy and Croatia. You know the region very well. As a state secretary in the Prime Minister office, you strongly advocate for continuing military and financial support from the EU in defending Ukraine. But at the same time, we know that Russia's aggression against Ukraine has completely shaken the existing security order in Europe. Where do you see the biggest challenges for the Southeastern Balkan region in this context? Mike.
Okay. I was thinking when my Finnish colleague was speaking, I was thinking, why were we surprised when Russia invaded Ukraine? I mean, Russia is invading countries in Europe all the time. How many aggressions they made against Finland? Have you a count on that?
Several.
I've heard 32 times. Okay. So they wanted to invade Yugoslavia when Tito said no to Stalin in 51. They have invaded Hungary in 56. They invaded Czechoslovakia in 68. So there was no end to it. They have invaded with their proxies in Poland in 81. They annexed Crimea in 2014, so why were we surprised? Because we didn't want to think that this is possible, but proofs were all around that it is possible. So what is linking together what Russians did to Ukraine and what happened in Yugoslavia is two things, basically. First of all, they were sure that when they will pull the tanks out of the barracks and show them in the streets of Kiev or Ljubljana and everywhere, that people will freak out and there will be no serious resistance. Mistake. And second was that people will somehow accept what they were doing, that maybe they will throw, instead of grenades, they will throw flowers on the occupation soldiers, which didn't occur. So I would like to finish this first part with the fact that I personally believe that Russia was defeated that third day of the aggression against Ukraine, because they had to move out of Kiev, and what they have today is what they occupy, of course, illegally, Donbas, but the first victory was there. And their occupation failed. They wanted to take over all Ukraine for them, and they didn't succeed. But at the end of the day, I will conclude with this. There is no place that anybody in this room or wherever in Europe or in the world believes that the outcome of this war will not have decisive impact on our future. Don't think that we will live normally if Putin wins this war.
Ambassador Volk, can you be more specific about what exactly this means for the region of Balkan? So where, if and where these possible spillovers are possible?
It was more before than now, because now Russia doesn't have this capability as maybe they had a year ago, because we have strengthened our fight against spies, against propaganda, against disinformation especially, because there was a lot of disinformation. Russia has a lot of their own problems. What happened a couple of days ago was a serious game changer, I believe, because the fact that Serbia, for the first time in their history, is buying Western planes, jets,
Yeah.
and not Russian, is one step beyond for Vučić and for Serbia. I don't know if it's already irreversible, but it's a great step beyond. And if we succeed to bring Serbia on the other side, to sit on one stool instead of two or three, because there is China also there, then Russia will be out of business in the Balkans very soon, and they are going out of business in the Balkans. Because at the same time, we fight organized crime in the Western Balkans, which is somehow always connected with money laundering in Russia.
Thank you. Thank you for this opinion. Moving to Russia, and of course, going directly into one of the major events that happened, tragic event, and this is the death of Alexei Navalny in prison in February. This event shocked the world, so I would like to ask Leonid, Volkov, what message should the West understand from this? And if this is a turning point for Kremlin from an authoritarian regime that was there from 2010 or 12, we know the significant developments at this point in Russia, towards something more Soviet type of reminiscent of Soviet times and repressions. Mike.
Yeah, thank you. And that's, of course, a great honor to be here today. Denis, frankly, I mean, Alexei was a great man, a dear friend, an amazing political leader, and a hero of our days. But I'm not ready to say that when he was murdered on February 16, 2024 by Putin's regime and the prison, it was a turning point, or it should have learned, like the West or anyone, anything. I mean, if the lesson was not learned in 2014 when Crimea was illegally annexed and the first time after the Second World War the borders have been redrawn in Europe with like annexation of part of territory of other country. If anything was not learned in 2018 in Skripal case in the UK, in 2019 Tiergarten mort in Berlin, when Putin was able to show that he's ready to like kill people in Europe, like absolutely cold-blooded. If the lesson was not learned on February 24th, 2022, then I'm afraid February 16th, 2024 was too late to learn any lesson. The problem was that for the last, like as Yulia Navalny said in her speech that you mentioned yesterday, the problem is that like 25 years of Putin, 10 years after annexation of Crimea, 2.5 years after the beginning of the war, well, the European Union, the West, the collective West still fails to have a clear and understandable, easy to describe Russia strategy based on the fact that you can't deal with Putin. That it's not possible to sit with him at the table, to negotiate with him about something that his word, his signature under any document is not worth anything, and that business with Putin cannot be business as usual at any time. That the only way to think about Russia and the future about Russia is to think and project like about the future of Russia after Putin, and to try to find ways to make it a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Talking about turning points, of course we can all answer to your question or self-question about did we learn something from the 2014 invasion of Ukraine. Of course we didn't. That's why this is part of the reasons we are here today. When talking about Alexei Navalny death and as a turning point, I meant the stage of the suppression and the regime from the inside. So is this a new dynamic, or is this something to be predicted? Because even in Soviet times, opposition leader were not killed in the prison.
Well, that's not true. Well, Marchenko died in prison in 1986, or Ukrainian dissidents like Vasily Stus died in Russian prisons in 1982 or 3, if I'm not mistaken, and so on. The fact is that Russia has more political prisoners than the Soviet Union ever had after Stalin. So, like, neither Khrushchev nor Brezhnev had that amount of political prisoners that Putin has now, and that the level of repression against those political prisoners only rises. And there is no single day after the beginning of full-scale wars that new political prisoners don't appear. There are many hundreds, several thousands of them now. Well, actually, like the only day in the last 2.5 years when the number of political prisoners went down for a short while was 1st of August, when few of them were released. And I have to use this opportunity to thank Slovenia for the role in making it possible for becoming like part of this quite unprecedented exchange, which was very important because, we not only we saw some of our friends free, which we didn't ever expect to see released, but also we gave some hope for other hundreds and thousands of political prisoners that, well, liberation is possible for them. And for some of them, it will be the anchor that will help them survive. And that's very important.
And my last follow-up question, under given circumstances, how can civil society, opposition movements even survive? How they can operate? Is it possible?
Well, we do operate, and it is possible. We don't have to overinflate expectations, but we also don't have to downplay the opportunities. Like for us, for the Anti-Corruption Foundation, the political movement founded by Alexei Navalny, our daily work means staying in touch with anti-war and anti-Putin-minded Russians. We reach about between 18 and 20 million people every month We have like 18 to 20 million viewers, listeners, and readers of our content, and that's one of our most important missions, like to stay in touch with anti-Putin Russians and to provide them with information, with like access to independent information, and so on. Not to leave them alone, not to let them feel like abandoned and forgotten. Now, many people then would say, okay, you say you reach out to 20 million people every month. Here is the statistics of your YouTube channel, but where are those people? Why they are not on the streets? And my answer is very simple. Recall like Eastern Europe, 1986. Did we see like millions of people on the streets? No. Let's recall Eastern Europe, 1989. People were like everyone from like Leipzig to Bucharest, from Warsaw to Moscow, from Vilnius to whatever. And did they fall from Mars in these 3 years? No, apparently not. They were there, and their like opinion on the Soviet regime didn't really change. They saw the opportunity. They saw it was now possible to manifest, to protest, to rise and so on, and they used this opportunity. I think the situation in current Russia is the same. We have tens of millions of people who oppose to Putin and what's going on. They don't see a practical opportunity to become visible. They perfectly know that for every attempt to become visible, they will be severely punished and will join the ranks of political prisoners. But should the situation change a little bit, somehow, for whatever reason, they will become a very strong power, very strong political power. And for us, the mission is now like to stay in touch, to keep afloat, to remain connected with this huge potential political power.
Thank you. And I would like to continue on this topic actually with Tatiana. So already Leonid mentioned that many ordinary Russian citizens, as let's call them silent victims of the war condition and repression within the Russia, their voices are practically unheard as they cannot express themselves at home, while at many places in the West, we already see the collective punishment of Russian citizens for the Kremlin's war. We see the closing doors for athletes, students, artists, and many others. Since Tatiana is working with NGOs and coming from the civil society, how do you see the situation in this light, especially for the ordinary people and those silent victims within Russia?
Well, I would say that, of course, we understand the motivation that stands between the sanctions and restrictions, and some of them seem to target Kremlin and current political regime, and we see some influence on decision-making about this war in Ukraine. But of course, there are a lot of these measures that seem to mostly target ordinary people and do not really make a change, do not make a difference. And for a lot of people, it seems unnecessary and unfair. And this kind of increases the isolation of Russian people. It makes them more vulnerable to the propaganda because they're not anymore exposed to some alternative points of views with this, because it's not possible to travel anymore. You cannot go on an exchange. A lot of, I don't know, even streaming services left Russia. You do not have good access to foreign content, some media. So, of course, there is some negative reaction. I mean, we understand, but still, it seems unnecessary, and it has some negative consequences on Russian society, and especially on Russian civil society, because now it became much harder to leave Russia in case if you're in danger, and there is no really good programs for political refugees. And in most Western countries, authorities do not even recognize the problem that people are coming and they're being denied in asylum and they're being deported back to Russia. So of course, it affects how people are willing to engage in some civil initiatives, because if there will be some legal consequences. There is no way to escape them. It's very hard and challenging.
Thank you for that. Let's stay a little bit longer with sanctions, because many questions here arises. The EU recently adopted the 14th package of sanctions against Russia, but still we see that they have limited effects on macroeconomic situation. Many sanctioned products and services still find bypasses to Russia through the Central Asia, countries like Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan. My question goes to Ambassador Hakala. What is the European Commission already doing to curb such loopholes that are there, and we cannot deny them? And what else more can be done in this respect?
Thank you very much. I just first want to comment what Tatiana said, and I understand what you mean, because there's always the dilemma if you have sanctions against a certain regime that it hits ordinary people. And we've seen it anywhere and everywhere and in many places. But the problem here is, of course, that the first motivation here and argument is to stop the war, to hamper the Russian economy, to make sure that Russia cannot proceed its war with Ukraine. And I would say that there are question marks and also questions and arguments. Are the sanctions really working? I think they are. Steadily but slowly, they hit the Russian economy. We've seen the signs already. This is for sure. The question of circumvention of sanctions is very complicated also and big. And it's not just, by the way, Central Asia or South Caucasus, neighboring countries who are part of it. Big countries are doing it too. I mean, we have several countries on the list if we look at it, China, India, Turkey, all that. But what we do, we try to cooperate with all these countries to convince them that actually we are not against of trading with Russia, commodity goods for normal citizens, but the sugar is in the bottom. We have 50 different items, so-called battlefield items, which we really try to stop at the borders. And that is the kind of key here. And what we do is that we try to, for instance, when we talk about Central Asia, my region, we are having a very in-depth dialogue with these countries. First, from the very beginning, to explain what it means, because it was very widely actually accepted and promoted. So first to explain what we really mean, and then to work with our like-minded countries within G7 to look at that. And what we are doing is we have trained the officers, the authorities, to stop the flows. It's happening already. We see a positive trend in this respect, that the amount of products which are sanctioned is diminishing in that trade. The trade flows are bigger, that's true. Multifold, we see that. But it's partly also explained that the trade flows actually were channeled not through Russia, but through Central Asia, through other countries. But it's also a process which is ongoing. But we have also appointed a special envoy, David O'Sullivan, who is dealing with the governments on a daily basis. So there is a lot we have done, a lot to be done, but this is also all our responsibility. It's also European responsibility to look after the companies who are selling these components either through Central Asia or some other countries. So it's our kind of collective responsibility.
In other words, you would say that the future Commission will do more and be even more proactive in this regard.
I am sure of it. Absolutely. What I listened Madame von der Leyen saying yesterday, so it indicated that definitely this work will continue, and we find ways. We have a lot of data, so we have an eye on all the flows and flows of components which are for the battlefield products.
Thank you. Ambassador Volk, Now, talking about parallel realities with respect to Russia, there are many, as I mentioned in my introduction, many cases that shows these parallel worlds that we are living in. One of these is the power of the Russian army that's supposed to be there according to Russia sources and of course according to Kremlin. But on the other hand, we see the loopholes in the border towards Ukraine and the situation in Kursk region. It seems that it's inherent into authoritarian regime that they're blinded by the grandeur and unwilling to recognize realities and see the problems. How you see this? Is there any parallelities with Yugoslavia and the 90s, let's say, or the end of 80s?
Because an old Russian joke came to my mind. It was not a joke, it's an anecdote. There was this Prime Minister Chernomyrdin in Russia who was not very successful, and he was asked why the ultimate reform wasn't successful. He said, "We did our best again, but the result was the same." So Russia is really, I mean, pushing with these annexations, occupations, aggressions, always with same result. What does that bring to Russian nation? In Yugoslavia ended like it ended, that it ended in shame, actually, because if you confront the dissolution of Soviet Union and Yugoslavia, or take even Czechoslovakia. Czechoslovakia and Soviet Union dissolved peacefully. And we have produced in Yugoslavia 100 and I don't know how many thousand to all of that people. Why was that? My answer is very simple. Soviet Union had Gorbachev, Czechoslovakia had Havel, and Yugoslavia had Milosevic. So count in all of those, equations, the national feelings of the grandeur of so-called grand nations with great history, with so-called unjust present, and with uncertain future. Because all the injustices that have been done have always been done to Russians or to Serbs. To Slovenians, never happened, nothing like that. We have lost Carinthia, I don't know, 100 years ago, and no, only Serbs have lost Kosovo. The British Empire was as big that the sun never went down. Today you have United Kingdom that is small. Austrian Empire was so big that tiny Austria that exists today, but only injustices happened just to Serbs and to Russia. So think about that. And I would say that nations who occupies themselves too much with the history, they are losing their future.
Thank you. Mr. Volkov, there are different assessments coming also from the Russian opposition leaders and analysts living outside Russia, whether the war has weakened or the opposite, strengthening Putin's regime. Would you agree with the assessment that in the short term, Putin has completely subordinated the vertical of power, but in the long term, he's severely crippled Russia, and the cost of the war will be enormous?
First of all, there was never like a response from the society. Putin tried his best to turn this war in the second edition of the Great Patriotic War, to force people rally around the flag to support him. They ended up raising the payoffs to those who sign up as volunteers for the war, like I think 20-fold from what they offered in the beginning, and already in the beginning they offered a lot. So there are...
Currently we stand at $10,000.
No, we stand...
It's already high.
5.2 million rubles. it's 55,000 euro. Like just if you subscribe. And even with this payment, which is like enormous by Russian measures, which is like where the average salary is about like 400 euro a month, they still are not able to to find anyone. There are no like queues at the conscription points. So the idea to sell this like war as a just war, as a patriotic war, as we have to defend the homeland, the fatherland, failed, and even the operation of the Ukrainian army in the Kursk region didn't change it, remarkably. What Putin succeeded to do was to consolidate the elite. And here, the West unfortunately helped a lot. Putin's elite was shaken by the war, caught in surprise. Putin didn't consult with them. He really took this decision almost alone in a very narrow circle of confidence. And there were moments of uncertainty, and when the Russian members of Russian elite didn't know where to go and how to act. But what the Western sanctions did, they did form a feeling they are in the same boat with Putin, and they have no way out and no chance to jump that ship. Either you go all the way down together with him, or you win together with him. When the sanctions against members of Russian elite were introduced, and we are now already in the 14th package, never a clear way out was suggested. Break up from him, leave the country, stop doing what you're doing, stop helping him, and you will be not considered as a war criminal. We will help you, we will lend you a hand. This was never done, and for many members of Putin's elite that were in doubt and trying to take sides, unfortunately, I'm not trying to clear them of their guilt. They are guilty, they are Putin's accomplices, but many of them found themselves in the positions that they felt that we have no choice. We are already the West considers us to be all the same entity with Putin, so now we don't have a choice but to help him and so on. And that was probably a mistake. Well, it can't be repaired now. Still, I think so. It's still possible to reach out to them, to find a way out for them, to try to increase turbulence and reduce the stability of the regime. But as of now, answering your question, Putin has reached a huge level of consolidation among his inner circle. It's now quite stable.
Thank you. Tatiana, roughly estimations are that 0.5 to 1 million Russians left the country in the last 2.5 years. We see that Russian authorities, and this might be something new for the audience, someone of you, are announcing measures against them, including confiscation of their property. How do you see working also in this community? What are the reasons that they decide to leave, and what kind of challenges they are facing in semi-forced exile, let's call it like that?
Okay, thank you.
Here you go.
Well, we definitely saw two big migration waves that happened in 2022. And both of them happened on this panic. A lot of people were leaving Russia after war just started because it was a very unpredictable situation. Nobody expected that. Nobody knew what to expect. So a lot of people were leaving just because of this fear. And of course, there was also a big migration flow after the beginning of mobilization, when a lot of people left because they were afraid to be mobilized and taken to the front line. But we can see that most of these people who moved of that reason, they come back. As soon as the situation is pretty much stable, they come back because, for example, when mobilization started and all these people came, afterwards, Russian authorities saw what is happening and they changed the strategy. They started to draft people from the villages, from remote regions. They provided certain security measures. When you, if you're a high qualified specialist, you can be booked from the army. You even get some privileges. For example, we have this IT mortgage. When you are an IT specialist, you get a special interest rate. And so people who actually like move and stay, these are people who move because of their values, their political views, because for them they do not see future in such isolated and aggressive environment. And because to face all these challenges of migration, you need to have really strong motivation. I mean, migration is always a very hard process. You miss your home, you miss your family, it's hard to adapt, and generally, like psychologically, it's not easy at all. But in current situations, when we have these visa restrictions, when we have these sanctions, it is really hard because, for example, in Germany, you have to wait for more than a year to get a residency permit. Or, for example, in France, to get a bank account, you need to collect rejection letters from the French banks, send them to French authorities, so they would force one of the banks to issue a bank account. And you have a job, you have a work visa, everything, you legally can get a bank account, but you have to do all this paperwork, you have to literally fight the system to stay, to have a life, to find a place in this society. So I would say only really strong motivation, like sense of your values, of your political beliefs can move you to do so.
Thank you. Let's try to squeeze one more round before we will give the floor to our audience. And first, I would like to ask Ambassador Hakala, since we all understand, we all know that bilateral Finnish-Russian relations changed significantly after the war and full invasion, notably illustrated by the Finland accession, of course, to NATO. But at the same time, Ambassador Volk already mentioned in his first answer these long-lasting conflicts and wars and aggressions of Russia towards Finland in the past. And that leaves us to the situation in which Finland lived for a long period of time after the Second World War. And since I see also the ambassador of Ukraine in the audience, what kind of paradigm we can see here when talking about the future of Ukraine joining NATO? So, because there are voices and opinions that at the end of the day, Ukraine will stay at the doorstep of NATO with similar kind of strategic situation in the region as Finland was forced to be in the past decades.
Well, first of all, I have to say that different times and different solutions. For us, that was a survival game after our war. The country was poor, we lost territories, we had a peace deal, and we accepted the solution like that. But it led, of course, to a situation where we tried to build a good neighborly relationship with Russia, and it lasted ever since, of course, as whole European Union tried to kind of live with Russia, coexist, and have cooperation. It was based on that understanding that if we have economic ties, if we have good neighborly relationship, respect a bit there, then, I mean, we can live together and develop this world peacefully and European security. Well, now we know it didn't happen. So what I want to say is that Ukraine is a different country from Finland. It faces same kind of invasion now, occupation of territories. I think Moscow, and especially Mr. Putin, looks at Ukraine in a different way than those days Stalin looked at Finland, because Ukraine is the heartland of Slavic nation, Slavic Union, as they see. So, I mean, Ukraine is in another way very important country, culturally, religionally, etc. So we have a lot differences there. So without commenting on any further decisions, of course, I would like to say that I want to see Ukraine in NATO, because I of course think that that is the security guarantee in some time frame. But we cannot go ahead of the solutions, and it's up to Ukraine also to negotiate and accept a just and sustainable peace one day with Russia. And we are there to support, help, as we say, whatever it takes, how long it takes. So it's a completely different situation. I definitely don't want to compare the solution and the foreign policy and the alliances of Ukraine after the war. Finland's story was Finland's story. It worked for us. It was a survival game all those years. We did survive. We joined EFTA, 86, already as associate member, 60s, then the European Union, now NATO. It was a long road. I sincerely hope Ukraine doesn't take this long road. So this is my answer for your question.
Thank you. Talking about sustainable peace, Ambassador Volk, there is at some point of time before summer or in the beginning of summer of 24, so this year, the idea of President Macron about the boots on the ground. And of course, we cannot discuss this topic without discussing so-called red lines constantly being put in our faces from President Putin and Kremlin. How do you see, as the State Secretary, this idea or initiative proposed by President Macron, and the first response coming from the other European leaders, and what might the future brings us?
Let me first tell that at least we always say it with bad things, not just bad things come along. And one of the interesting things to one old joke or anecdote has now been answered, because we were always telling to each other that there is one question which you can answer only in two versions, is a sincere answer to yourself. What would you choose if you would have to choose between Russian liberation or American occupation? So now we have this answer by Russia, at least for me personally. But on the top of that, I would like to repeat that all of us who are thinking that, not me, or all of those people who are thinking that they will get rid of Russian threat by leading Ukraine to capitulation.
There are those voices,
yeah,
also in our
they
region,
call
also in
themselves
Slovenia.
Pacifists, yeah, are denying the history of Slovenian nation, which fought two times for our liberty and our liberation during the occupation of Germans, Hungarians, and Italians in 41. Those who were pacifists at that time said, how can we resist great armies? It's useless. We must hide and wait until this passes. And those, like my father and my grandfather, who took arms in their hand and liberated us from those occupators, even with the arms that we got from Americans, Brits, and so on. And again in 91, when we were occupied, we were faced with aggression of Yugoslav army. Pacifists was completely useless at that time. Today, there will not be Slovenia free, living not just in peace, but also free, in freedom, if we would listen to the pacifists. And yet, there are some people preaching pacifism to Ukraine, that we should not help Ukraine, that we should not sell arms and so on, which leads only to capitulation of Ukraine. This is a shame. This is a simple shame. And it's not honoring what my father did in his life and what my grandfather did in his life, and what I did during the independence war in Slovenia. So let's be clear. The outcome of this war will define the future of Europe and of our young generations. And we must work on that. We must not be defeated. With saying that, I don't deny the possibility that tomorrow we will have a ceasefire, and we will continue this war with diplomatic means instead of with the weapons. That would be perfect. But we must not never give up. If we want to have any future. Never.
But, Ambassador Volk, let's stay a little bit with you on this. Maybe clarification. So, do you think that European leaders should work and should do more, let's say, to convince internal voters, public, that this is a realistic scenario, I mean, the boots on the ground, in the future, if we will not see the ceasefire in the near future, or if we will see even the escalation in war in Ukraine?
Well, if I answer you that is not possible, it would mean that I would agree that only Russian boots can be in Ukraine. Well, now we have Ukrainian boots in Russia, do we? Okay, so I don't have to prolong on that. But I would like to refer what yesterday was said by Yulia Navalny, that Europe has no strategy towards Russia. That was true before aggression, and it is true even now. And we really must have some exit strategy with Russia when one day it will come, we will have a ceasefire. But the strategy must include reality on the ground and the fact that we tried with Russia best we could. I remember Otto von Bismarck, when he was asked what is the best to do with Russians, he said, the best we can do with Russians is to strike a good business deal with them. Well, Angela Merkel struck a perfect deal with Russia, having all the gas from Russia, oil and everything, but it was not enough, you know. And then they were telling us that our sin is that we don't understand the Russian soul and the reasons why they attacked Ukraine. No? Because, you know, there are some people who tell, yeah, but you must now understand what was leading Russia to do that. And then I remember of Ronald Reagan, who was one of the maybe best joke tellers of all American presidents, said anecdote about him. And he said that before his first meeting with Gorbachev in 1980, his advisor told him to watch a Russian movie called Moscow Doesn't Believe Tears. Moskva slezam ne veri. And next morning, he talks with his advisor again. He said, listen, I have watched this movie 8 times. I don't understand the shit, he said. But his deal with Gorbachev was the best in history. Okay, thank you.
Mr. Volkov, today we already heard, and yesterday, about the missing strategy towards Russia. Also, you already mentioned the release of political prisoners, Ilya Yashin, including, and Vladimir Kara-Murza on the 1st of August. Can you elaborate a little bit more about what are the plans of political opposition and exile in the future? Is consolidation and some joint action possible? And what are the priority topics?
That's a broad question. I could talk hours. about this, but to keep the answer short and to leave more space for questions.
And you also have to catch your plane. So
yes,
it's no.
that's another problem. I would answer like this. First of all, the grand strategy for Russian political opposition was always the same and remains intact for the last 12 years or so, which is to use every opportunity to make Putin weaker, to use every opportunity, whatever it be, like retirement age reform, mobilization, like elections, whatever, to get more people from the influence of propaganda, to open to more people eyes about what's actually going on. And very different tools, from like anti-corruption investigations to endorsing independence in local elections, to protest rallies when they were possible, or any forms of like horizontal civil organization were used. And we are still doing it and will continue. It's not an easy job to defeat a dictator. Sometimes it takes, unfortunately, very many years, and many countries in Europe are unfortunately familiar with this. But like the fighting spirit is still there. It's not going to vanish. What we know and what we think about in our strategy is, first, of course, no better Russia is possible with Putin. And like, I don't believe in any, as I already thought, negotiations, ceasefire, whatever. He will not respect his own word, as he did many times before. I can imagine him signing some, like, I don't know, ceasefire agreement, and the only thing he will use it to produce more weapons and to think about the mistakes he committed in the past and to prepare for a better new aggression. So first thing, it's not possible with Putin, and second, that Putinism will not survive after him. It's a very personalistic dictatorship built on very personal ties that Putin has with the members of his elite when he serves as a like supreme arbiter in their conflicts. And after Putin, we will deal with a kind of like death of Stalin scenario when there will be a huge internal struggle within the elite. And our grand strategy is targeting this moment. Like, whenever and for whatever reason it happens, we have to be ready to become an important player at this point of time. And this is where I believe all key opposition players unite. Of course, we are different movements, different people, that's okay. We are not Putin's party, we not share exactly the same views on everything, but strategically, the goals are the same, and yeah, we are talking to different audience and using different tools, but when necessary, we are perfectly able to act together, and that's fine.
Okay, thank you. And the last question from my side, at least, goes to Tatiana. Months ago, the Kremlin added LGBTQ movement to the list of extremists and terrorist organizations, as we all heard. Although no such organization exists in Russia, we already see the first results of this policy. Not only minority members being prosecuted and treated more harshly, but this also this brings to additional labels and uses for purposes of snitching, which is very becoming a major problem within Russia, and being instrumentalized in various aspects of social life. Where this path leads?
Repressive legislation in Russia towards LGBTQ community existed before 2022. We had this gay propaganda for kids law that was mostly targeting like public figures, activists, some public events, protests. But since 2022, we can see that all this legislation has impact on the personal life. And it's not just this decision about making LGBTQ an extremist movement. It also a lot of other new policies and laws. And we can see that the most vulnerable categories are, of course, families with kids, because there is a lot of cases when kids were taken from their families because they are non-traditional and being put in the orphanage. And also, of course, for transgender people, because gender transition is now banned completely in Russia, although we had quite progressive policies about transgender people before. And their status remained illegal or legal. It's quite a gray zone. And we see for sure increased number of requests for legal advice, for psychological help, and also a lot of people are seeking opportunities to leave Russia for their own safety. But if we are talking about like a general picture, of course we can see that the reason why Russian authorities are implementing all this repressive legislation is that it is easy to manipulate people with the fear, and this homophobic views that are being rising in Russia for like last several years, they are being exploited massively in Russian propaganda. Almost every video about this pro-war narrative that I saw, all these propaganda videos, in almost every of it, they use this homophobic views, this fear of gay people. The most recent one was literally showing guys with earrings, drinking smoothie, and then the guys in the army being cool, masculine. They play on that fear, and it's gonna have significant impact on the society for sure.
Thank you. Now let's move to the question. The first opportunity I would like to give to the young Bled Strategic Forum participants, if there are any, please. Pavel, just wait a second for the mic.
My name is Pavel. I'm a foreign policy advisor in the Belarusian Democratic Movement. So I just kind of like to shift the focus on Belarus. So Putin's main ally, the Lukashenko regime, especially in the war with Ukraine. But our position is, I guess this is more for the European representatives here, why isn't more being done to pressure Lukashenko? There's only a 60% harmonization of sanctions. He earns hundreds of millions on helping Russia avoid them. How come there's no arrest warrant for his involvement in the illegal deportation of Ukrainian children, what Putin got from the ICC? We submitted evidence personally. We met with the Ukrainians, we met in The Hague, but we feel like, I don't know, maybe politically Belarus is so low down that it's just easier to ignore it. I would love to get your view on this. Thank you.
Pavel was already looking to Ambassador Hakala, I believe, so
I
floor.
saw that. Look, first of all, I am not here I cannot talk for the ICC, but of course they collect evidence in any case. They need considerable amount of evidence to kind of have a warrant on any person, but this is a good idea maybe. But the point is that, of course, I think that the focus is mainly now on Putin and his entourage, because we know where it came from. And then, of course, Belarus is a very worrying place for all of us. We follow and we worry, and we worry for the civil society, human rights defenders of Russia, Belarus. That's true. But I think that the main focus is definitely now on Putin and his entourage and Russian leadership. So, but I have no idea, I have no information what The Hague is doing, but this I know, that they need considerable amount of evidence to issue a warrant.
Anyone else? Yeah, we have a question from the gentleman.
I'm Alex from Latvia, currently working at the MFA. Question to Leonid, Volkov: can we trust Russian opposition? Because I can share my feelings from yesterday. There was the speech of Garry Kasparov, great speech. It was clear that, Ukraine should win, Russia should lose. He mentioned regime change. He said that if some nations inside Russia want to leave Russia, they can freely do so. Stuff like that. And then speech of Yulia Navalny, it was different. She basically questioned the logic behind the sanctions. When she was talking about unity of Russia, she said that voices who say that some nations may leave Russia should be silenced, and she also said that we also should silence those voices who are Russophobic. There was other points in this speech that I didn't particularly liked, but people in general were standing and clapping. But there was some in the crowd who was sitting and not clapping. And I guess we all know who those people were. Mostly Ukrainians, Latvians, Lithuanians, Estonians, Poles, because they do not trust that the vision that she has is the better vision. So what's your take on that?
Well, first of all, in democracy, you don't have to clap to every opinion you hear and don't have to agree with any opinion. And like Yulia and Gary indeed have different opinions on some topics, while they agree in what I believe is the main thing, that Putin's regime has to be dismantled and Putin has to be defeated. Now, what Yulia said yesterday was not about right of nations to leave, but about this so-called concept of so-called decolonization, where like people draw maps of like Russia divided in 30 states, etc., because of like being too large and so on, which is a concept that like only helps Russian propaganda a lot. We are dealing with propaganda and resistance to it very much. And there is a significant problem. 75 or 76% of Russians, according to our latest polls, do agree that like do not support the war, do want the war to end like tomorrow, would be happy if it went end tomorrow, and consider the war to be a mistake. The problem is that also, like when we try to explain them, the war is a bad thing and so on, we are preaching to the converts. The Russian propaganda has retreated to a second line of defense a long time ago. I mean, it's clear even for Putin supporters that it was a mistake, that kind of like he shouldn't have done it, it cost enormously, didn't give any results. Even for those who like are actually supporting Putin, like, yeah, let's fight, let's conquer and so on, they see at least some part of the reality and believe it's a mistake. What Russian propaganda is telling them is, yes, it was a mistake, but now we have no choice. There is one option, we stand by Putin and we win, whatever it means, or the other option, we lose. And by losing, they mean something like Germany 1945, like NATO troops occupying Russia, dividing foreign control and so on. And this very simple manipulation, this fake alternative, helps Russian propaganda enormously, like to consolidate people and so on. Everyone who is like against supporting Putin, he is a traitor, etc., etc., etc. So, like, while 3/4 of Russian population think that the war is a bad thing, 3/4 of them think now we have no choice but to like stand with Putin till the end. And it's a very important task for the Russian opposition to prove this is wrong, to address this problem, to present a clear alternative. That it's not like the only way is either to stay with Putin till the end or to have Russia like destroyed, humiliated, and occupied, but there is a clear alternative, like a path to European democratic country, a normal Russia, and so on. And yeah, it's our opinion, like whatever doesn't help to promote this narrative helps Russian propaganda, that's true. Because that's now what Russian propaganda is playing on.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yeah, the lady in the second row.
Alla Savchenko, I am from Ukraine. I am not agree with name of this section. This is very easy way, put all responsibility for Putin. It's, in your comment, maybe most than half Russian people support the war. And just now, Ukrainian movie maker create very good documental film, Peaceful People, and recording negotiation between parents and soldier, Russian soldier. Horrible. And this is horrible people living in near Europe. And I don't know, it's, this is not Putin war, this is Russian war against Ukraine. And
The question.
Question
Yes.
to Mr. Volkov and Tatiana. Yeah, it's in my opinion, we are, and this question and proposition, and just now in Ukrainian army in Kursk, ahead to Kursk, create democratic government or something, help Russian people and Kursk and stay, created new democracy and new government here. We have opportunity. Why you not use and sitting here and discuss about what we must do? And just now we have excellent chance by Ukrainian heroes who help Russia.
Okay.
You are thinking about this or no?
You would like to answer? Okay, sure, you can shortly.
So, while a lot of anecdotal evidence could be collected to support any possible viewpoint, and we can record many conversations of Russian soldiers who commit war crimes and are proud of it, but we also can collect very many voices of Russians who are against the war and are ready to risk a lot of it. We don't have to forget that Russia is a huge and complicated country which has to be studied with more thorough methods than just collecting anecdotal evidence. Sociologically, and we do invest a lot in actually studying the Russian society, it looks approximately like this. About 10%, less than 10%, 8%, are fierce supporters of everything that Putin does. Kill more Ukrainians, do whatever possible, and so on. They are kind of more patriotic than Putin is. Approximately 30% are against, don't like Putin, but, well, their voice is silenced, and the only voice they hear in the public space is the voice of that 8 to 10% that's enormous, that is enormously amplified. And then there are 60%, the political gray zone, the political swamp, people who don't care. And that's a great tragedy and a great problem. People whom Putin learned in the last 25 years that you don't have to think about politics, that politics is always a dirty business, that I know better, that you don't have to care. For them, the war still doesn't exist. They don't feel it. They try to abstain of any forms of participation in political life. We see our mission and our focus on working with those people, on reaching them, on trying to politically activate them, to save them from the propaganda. We are Russians, we did Russian politics for many years, we ran successful electoral campaigns, we know how to fight with them. It's an efficient application of our very limited resources because that's something we can do. Theoretically, I could probably also take a machine gun. This would not be, unfortunately, sorry, I'm not very fit and young, would be a sophisticated application of our resources. Unfortunately, we won't make a difference there in Kursk. Working with Russian in information space, that's something where we can make a difference. So my answer to your question is that the efficient way to use limited resources in the common fight against Putin is that for everyone to be in that place where they can make a difference.
Thank you. Oh, let's move to the last question. This will be yeah, sure.
Yeah. So for me personally, like I'm an individual, I do not represent any organization. For me, the question of responsibility comes from the question of power. If you have power over a certain situation or not, because if you're completely powerless, you cannot be held accountable for certain situation. And Putin, as a leader of one of the largest countries of the world, taking control over natural resources, he of course takes the most of responsibility. But people who, for example, committed war crimes or worked for propaganda machine, they also should be held accountable. They had a choice. War crime is not something that you're forced to do. So I think all this question of responsibility should be taken like not generally, but on each case separately. And of course, we, like as a nation, hold some kind of accountability, but I don't think that each individual can be called, for example, a criminal or supporter of the war just because of their citizenship.
Thank you. And Ambassador Volk has also a remark on this.
No, I think we should always distinguish between Putin and Russians and Putin's regime. We needed always to distinguish between Hitler and the Germans that were victims of Hitler. And in all regimes, Russian nation is, I love Russian nation, and I don't like Putin. And this leads you also to some concrete situation which I had a month ago. There was this ballerina coming from Russia, Zahara, and we didn't issue a visa for her. And I was asked, why don't you issue visa because she's Russian? No, I said, not because she's a Russian, but because she openly and publicly advocates aggression on Ukraine, which is the biggest crime of all. That's the reason why we didn't issue the visa, not because she's Russian. Because a year before, we had a singer from Russia that had no problem, opera singer, I forgot her name. See, there is always a difference between Putin regime and normal Russians, always. There is.
Thank you. We have the last question. Please keep it short.
Hi, my name is Julia Martinet, and I have a question for you. Since you mentioned, and yesterday we had also Yulia Navalnaya and Garry Kasparov, who were talking about the goals of the Russian opposition, working inter alia from abroad. And you mentioned also that you have and keep actively try to keep the reach the population also within Russia. So, like, concretely, what do you think, in your opinion, needs to happen to create the conditions? Because the goal of the Russian opposition is to remove Putin, right? And to bring, like Yulia Navalnaya said yesterday, like it will take some years, or was it Garry Kasparov? It will take some years before democracy really will rise in Russia after Putin is gone. But what are the conditions, in your opinion, as a politician and an opposition leader, for that to happen, for those millions of people to rise up or to just change the regime?
I already gave an example with like Eastern Europe in the 80s, when like something changed in the air. Somehow people realized, people got the feelings that now it's possible to speak out, and they started to speak out. What was the trigger, like, exactly? Yeah, maybe, well, like Gorbachev meeting Reagan in Malta, or like glasnost or whatever, maybe something else. Like people, like voters as like political subjects somehow managed to feel the things better than many journalists, experts, politicians, and so on. The only thing based on Russian history is that we can predict about changes in Russia, that it always comes unpredictable.
And with that, we will conclude our panel. Thank you very much, dear panelists, for great discussion. Thank you.